My name is Greene, and this is Kevin Houle, and we're going to be doing a kind of part two of the first part last year was on ISP security, real-world techniques, stuff that's happening out there from the ISP context. And for this audience, which I assume everybody here is some sort of operator or associate with an operator or a vendor with working with operators. So we'll be speaking from the operator point of view. And for those of you who've done any sort of security from a service provider point of view, you'll find that security in a service provider point of view is a little bit different flavor than security from like an enterprise point of view. So we'll be bringing up some concepts that you don't really usually hear about in an enterprise traditional security firewall sort of talk. This session came about from discussions that every now and then I've had with my colleagues like Kevin and Rob Thomas and some of the people from CERT, where we're looking at, what is different threats out there. And one of the worries of threats that are out there that you hear about all the time is our problem on the edge with our customers. And in this case, the customer provider equipment edge, those small little routers or sometimes big little routers on the edge that us as providers connect up to and we talk to as our customers. So what we'll be walking through in this presentation is talking about these CPE devices and the threat from them when they get violated. And the concern here is that we see all sorts of evidence that these products are violated. People are broken into and used them for all sorts of different things. So where this is at, if you haven't got this already, we've got it online, two sources, just in case we couldn't get it up to the NANOG site already, but it's already on the NANOG page. So you can download the slides. The NANOG page has the PDF. The ISP Essentials site has the PDF and PowerPoint. So if you want to use some of these slides for your own training, we have no problem with you taking the PowerPoint and hacking it for your own training and purposes. The idea with the NANOG tutorials is to get the word out, right? And so if you want to use this in your own company, go for it, all right? Go for it. And to give a big introduction, this is the Surf. This is kind of like the fun part. I know there's discussions on one of the security aliases where somebody was saying, here's an idea for securing the internet, which is kind of counter to this. But the wonderful thing about the internet is you're connected to everybody, and the scary thing about the internet is you're connected to everybody, and that's the way the internet is, right? And we're all wide open, right, to it, and that's the paradigm that we live in. And how do you secure yourself when you're in that paradigm? So from an ISP point of view, I kind of like and express it. I talk about how what's the responsibility for providers, what are our responsibility? Number one, you got to protect yourself, okay? So protecting yourself in this context is you got to make sure that, things from other ISPs and things from your customers don't hit and attack you, and all sorts of attack vectors with that. And then the next one is there is some responsibility of help protecting your peers. Stuff coming out of your customers and hitting somebody else across the internet, right, wherever. So there's some responsibility you have there. And then the third one is helping to protect your customers from the stuff coming out from the outside world, right? Now this is a bit different from enterprise. Enterprise, you got one connection or two connections, you Multihome, right? You put some firewalls up and you're protecting your network. You're just protecting yourself. So in an enterprise context, your responsibility is to protect yourself. Put up Bastion, big walls, layered security, all those different principles. For a service provider, it's not just protecting yourself. You got customers and you got your peers, all right? If you let your peers go down, well, guess what? You don't have an internet anymore. We depend on that parent connection, the interconnectivity of everybody. So the responsibility is broader than you see in a regular enterprise scenario. So our focus is this edge, the edge between a provider and the customer. So that's our context. There's lots of other things to talk about ISP security, but for this session, we're just going to be focusing on what's going on at this part of the network, okay? And here's what we're going through with, we're going to talk about compromising, okay? We're going to talk about once you compromise the malicious things that can happen there, what can happen with the route injections, because we got lots of BGP speakers out there. What happens if you play around with registry information, and then we'll talk about denial of service attacks directly on your customer equipment on those links. Okay. And so now I'm going to do, the way we're going to do this is Kevin's going to do the parts of all the risk and threats and scary stuff out there, you know, tap into his hat with CERT and say the stuff he can say with CERT. And then I'll do a part of things you can actually turn on and things you can do, some of the techniques you can do. And so you're going to have to pardon us. We're going to be handing this back and forth throughout.
Yeah, I haven't touched a router in 4.5 years, so that's why I'm doing the threat part and he's doing the what you can do about it part. So as far as customer premise equipment goes, we have seen probably within the last year an increase in intruders actually compromising both routers and broadband devices, cable modem type equipment. The perceived threat of that is when an intruder gets into any kind of device on the internet, they're able to do bad things with it against other sites. The reality is there are tools out there, probably a couple of dozen, that are designed to automatically scan for and compromise both routers and broadband devices. There is a growing number of informational texts that are developed by the intruder community, posted to public websites that instruct less clueful people on how to go about executing these attacks. So the body of knowledge is beginning to accumulate in terms of how to execute attacks against routing equipment and CP devices. Lists of compromised CP devices are traded in the underground. The going rate, according to some of Rob Thomas's observations, is one hacked Cisco box is worth about 3 stolen credit cards. So there's an economy for this kind of stuff. Just because, you know, the person who breaks into a router isn't necessarily the one who exploits it. That router goes on the open market for anyone else to buy and use. We have received reports of incidents at CERT-CC, single incidents involving several thousand compromised routers due to the automated scanning that happens. So this stuff is real activity that is going on. If you haven't seen it yet, chances are you will. As I mentioned, a lot of the tools that are in use are automated, anything from C-level executable programs to IRC scripts that people run out of their IRC clients. We haven't really seen distributed style tools used for the reconnaissance. You know, there's manual attacks where people will do a trace route to find a particular router. Those are actually a little more scary in my mind because that's a targeted attack, someone looking to get into a particular area of the network versus scanning for anything that will respond. Most of the compromises that we've seen have been a result of devices that have default or no password whatsoever set on them. And that's easy picking for the intruder community. In some cases, there's compromises that happen with weak or well-known passwords, and we've had a few instances of operators managing devices across clear text, in clear text across the network, and the authentication credentials are sniffed by an intruder, and then the intruder is able to compromise the network. In some cases, we've had reports of social engineering being used to do this type of stuff. Insider attacks were also a threat in terms of disgruntled employees that may have privileged access to customer routing equipment that decide they want to go in and do something bad. Impact-wise, a compromised router is sometimes used for nothing more than writing a text file to distribute to other people to say how to do something as a learning experience. We also see compromised routing equipment used for proxy as a bounce point to obfuscate an intruder's true location, be it to connect to IRC or to do whatever. We've seen denial of service attacks executed from routing equipment and from broadband devices, packet floods initiated from those devices in distributed fashion. Some of the scripts that are out there will take a list of compromised routers and send commands to all of them to execute a DDoS attack. We've also seen, and not so much of this, but we expect this to increase, so it's something to really plan for, is trust-based attacks. Once you're into a router, you can do all kinds of things in terms of modifying configuration, and we'll get into more of that as we go. I'll give it back to Barry to talk about what we can do about this.
Okay. So from a service provider, what can an ISP do about all this as this is going on? Assume the worst. Typical security, you can't assume that your customer is somebody to be trusted. Okay, and that's what it's getting down to the bottom line, because we're seeing now in all these indications where if you got people going in and breaking in routers, well, you can't trust that somebody's there. So, simple things like, BCP38 ingress filtering, which you hear a lot about. Don't trust the packets coming from your customers, because we know that's a big source of DDoS out there. People spoof the attacks. Don't do things, because even though this might sound silly here in this forum, but people like myself and Philip Smith still run into ISPs out there who think it's a good idea to run an IGP between themselves and their customers. So as a content routing protocol to go through, now you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't trust them to do that. Doing things like route filtering, doing ingress route filtering, which we'll talk more about in the malicious when you inject prefixes. So assume the worst. Assume they're out there. Do things for your customers, right? We're getting more of them, and I hope we will get even, more providers to do it. But do up a security web page. Help your customers secure themselves by saying, here's what you should do to protect yourselves. Okay. So I've seen some providers even have a little tool that they can log into to kind of like scan themselves, right? So you can even go to that sort of services as a service enhancement, and if you position it right, a provider can position this as a value-added competitive service. Come to me, and I'll help you secure your network. And of course, there's a market starting to take off with virtual firewalls and things like that in the industry. So think about trying to really help your customers protect themselves. Okay, do like the customer security alias. Get the word out. This is, you think about it, you got mom and pop shop with a Cisco 2600, and it's sitting out there connecting up their small little business, and do they get notices from CERT or CERT that, hey, there's a massive SNMP vulnerability out there, everybody should go up there and upgrade their iOS image? They don't get any of that information. Right? They don't get that. They're not plugged into that. They can barely log into their equipment to maintain it. Do things to reach out to them and tell them this is something you should worry about. Right? This is communication. Communicate with your customers so they have a clue of what's going on. Okay. Policies, preparation, practice. Especially the key with the practice. Start setting up your tools, and this is something you're going to hear a lot of. The big providers who have already done this kind of tell other providers that, look, it can be done. There is a set of tools out there that you can put in place to help you mitigate when one of these CPE devices get broken into and start causing mischief. Okay? So create your policies, publish the policies. Let people know what your policy is going to be if you are the source of the attack or if somebody is attacking you. So they have the contact numbers to reach your security people. Most of the providers I talk to, they say the number one problem we have in the ISP security world today is they can't find each other's peers. Well, if ISPs can't find one another's peers, well, how can your customers find the security person inside the provider they're buying service from? All right, so just finding the person sitting in ISP whose job is to do security, whose job is to put an access list on somewhere, has been a big problem. And if ISPs can't find it with each other, how can your customers find it? All right, so getting that information out there, putting it up on a web page so people can find it. Set things up like classification ACLs. It was amazing like a year and a half ago how many different ISPs didn't understand what a classification ACL was. all right? And whether, you know, they didn't know that they should set up a classification ACL and have them ready to go. Have them scripted, have them ready to go. Like myself, I have a whole bunch of different classification ACLs sitting on my laptop, ready to go to cut and paste into router configs if I ever get called in to do stuff. You know, it's kind of prepared. I can cut and paste these things in. So they're not like rocket science. It's just taking some foresight to prepare to do things like that instead of waiting until an attack happens and then figuring out how to create an ACL to do a classification to figure out what protocol type is being used for the attack. Set up things like sinkholes, which I'll talk a bit more about. Set up things like your backscatter traceback technique. Now, these aren't tools that are universally going to work for every situation, but these are tools like in the toolbox. There are some situations where they'll apply. There's some situations they won't apply. But they're the sort of thing that you have to build in and you have to prepare for before it happens. It's not something that you do in the middle of the attack. So don't wait for the attack to happen. Don't wait for your customer's router to get violated to go ahead and build these tools. You want to do it ahead of time. All right. Take like a sinkhole. Right. We get these in increase now, and we will get more of these distributed worm sort of tools. Right. And we're seeing it's not just Microsoft anymore because we just had our last one with Apache, and we're going to see more of these sort of tools out there. That is basically a worm that goes from one device to the next device to the next device, looking for other devices to break into, and then they're triggered. They're built into it, triggered to do certain things. Okay? You can use them to do all sorts of things. It's you know, the limit is the imagination of the guy who codes it, of what they want to do with it. Now, you as an ISP should know what's going on. All right? You should know that it's happening. You should also know how many of your customers are violated. All right? And one simple technique is with a sinkhole. All a sinkhole here is you got a section of your network designed to suck in traffic. You can use dark IP space, which is some addresses you're not using. You can use some bogon space. You can use space that just attracts people. It's kind of like an ISP equivalent to a honeypot. And stick some devices in there to monitor. You know, if it's an Apache worm up there, load up a copy of Apache in there and see how many times you get hit. And track who's hitting you. And scan your logs. If you want to go out there and tell your customers who are violated that, hey, your server's, compromised, you should go do something about it, then that's your choice. If you want to watch it and just see how bad of a problem is in your network, then you can watch that. But at least you have the data. At least you get something in place and ready to go with. Okay? So, on track, look for these things. Now, this is something you don't want to wait until the next big worm to do, right? You don't want to wait till the next big code red to do something like this. This is something you want to put in place before it happens. Okay? Now, you may not use it for like 6 months. That's okay. It's there. It's a tool. It's ready to go. But then when you need it, you can pull it out and use it. And that's the trick. To be able to have these tools ready to go so you can pull it out and use it. Right? Simple things that, providers are always encouraged to use. Monitor your customer's bandwidth. All right. Now, this is something you should be doing for traffic engineering, just to understand how you engineer your capacity, so you know what you need to do capacity-wise. But it also is a valuable security tool. Because if you're watching your statistics on your customers, and all of a sudden one of these worms start popping up, and you're looking at your weekly customer charts, and all of a sudden you see huge spikes on your customers, you can actually use this data to find out who's actually sending out all this worm traffic. For instance, Code Red was one of these things where you look at this sort of data and you can see who's violated by Code Red by looking at the customer statistics. Because they're, all of a sudden they were like, 2% average utilization through the day, and all of a sudden they're 90% or 100%. Right? The data kind of showed that. And this is stuff, any ISP who wants to do good traffic engineering, statistic collection, this is not rocket science stuff. I think, Steve, did you talk about this last session? Simple tools. Right. You don't have to go out there and buy expensive packages. This is all simple sort of things you can do with it. And by the way, all these graphs I showed in this last one, these are all derivatives of MRTG tools. Right? It's just different guys did different graphics to them. Right? Strong authentication to the router devices. SSH. Right? Because as Kevin mentioned, people sniff. Right? And pick off passwords that way, okay? And especially if you have a managed CPE service, all right? I know several of the providers out there, they keep on questioning, well, why should I have to worry about doing, SSH to my managed CPE devices out there? I'm just going across my own network and routers. And I go to them and say, well, how do you know that your network hasn't been broken into? How do you know if somebody hasn't already broken into your NOC, or the guy who's logging into your remote management hasn't already broken into and sniffing all these passwords? Okay? How do you know that somebody hasn't already gone in and, broken in to the device and figured out what the password is, right? So good password policies, using something like SSH to manage your CPE devices, those are all, common sense sort of things that we don't see much of. I give a sanity case in that you take like my house, right? I got 2 DSL links and a cable link, right, into my house. So, cable path is one physical link and DSL is riding on the same, so I'm physical diversity into the house, right? And, I got control over all three. Now, only one of them I'm supposed to have control over, but I have control over all three. Because all you have to do is download the documentation. Here's the device, go to the website, download the docs. How do you do password recovery? Okay? Go through, do the password recovery procedures. Okay, all right, okay, I got control of the box, right? Does the provider know that? No. Right? Because they don't have anything set up to tell that I just kind of be in control of the equipment in my house, right? But me being a security guy, the equipment sitting in my house, I would like to have control. I like to know if somebody else has broken into my stuff, right? So that's how I do it, right? Two of the three providers have web pages that I can go to that says here's best common practices. I can go to pages and they say here's pages to help you secure your home, sort of thing. So two of them have that. One of them doesn't. All three allow spoofed source addresses, right? So, and I've learned this, I didn't plan on doing this, but I learned this by messing up the route in my house where I had packets go out one link and come back to the other link. So I had this nice different asymmetry, and my kids were complaining because CartoonNetwork.com website wasn't working right, and so I had to go and troubleshoot and say, I got my routing all messed up. And, this is interesting. What if I turned it around, I turned it around and said, okay, me, Mr. Unicast RPF, and all three sites, okay, this is an interesting data point, right? There's no messages from any of the three providers. I never got anything from any of them about any security stuff going on. Go upgrade your software, right? So in Cisco, I was one of the guys who was working 7x24 on the S&P vulnerability earlier this year, and worked my butt off on that, and I used these three devices kind of sanity check, right? We're going through, okay, who's vulnerable, and all three of them were vulnerable. The remote power strip was vulnerable. There's a pretty nasty little vulnerability all over the place. And did I get anything from any of the three providers that say, hey, go upgrade? No. Right? So if I hadn't gone in and upgrade, then they'd still be vulnerable. Now, hello, that's just me doing it. That means all the other customers out there are still with this vulnerability out there. They haven't upgraded yet. All right? So, and only one of them, and Cisco wasn't one of them. Cisco, we got to fix this, but I was pretty impressed with another brand out there, that allowed a very simple menu that say shut down remote access for all your ports. I was kind of impressed with that. You just flip a switch and say no. And then from the outside world, they can't connect to any port 23, port 80, any of that. They can't connect in. So it's, Ethernet you can, but outside you can't. You just say no, and then it's done. And say, that's pretty cool. That's a good feature. And that's something that on the CPE vendor side, so those of you who are vendors, look at your CPE equipment. So I saw that, and I set the note inside Cisco and said, we got to do this. This is really easy, layman's, no access list or anything. You just say no, right? And then it works. And it's kind of cool little thing. But so those of you who are vendors, go back and see if you can do that easy. If you can type in no and you lock down your device. Some of the that's the controversy going back and forth, because some of the providers we work with, they don't want it default. DOCSIS, right? Those of you who understand DOCSIS, right? You open up wide open, with well-known S&P ports, so you can plug it in and it automatically configures, but then people don't automatically set up the security configs, so it configures in unsecured mode. You run into that sort of problem with DOCSIS. All right. So now, people who break into it, now what do they do with it? Wow.
Yes. So once an intruder gets control of a router, what can happen in terms of configuration? Again, there's ongoing development of techniques and sharing of techniques in the underground community in terms of how to alter router configurations once you have control of one. The clue bar isn't real high here yet, but it's incrementing. So this stuff's going to get worse as time goes by. The methods of configuration are largely through direct access to a compromised box. Theoretically, reconfiguration could happen through unprotected management interfaces such as web interfaces or even via SNMP. Think about it. If an intruder gets onto one router, one CPE router, and can figure out the SNMP community on that, what's the odds that the same community string will work on every other CPE router connected to the same network? One thing intruders can do is lock out legitimate administrators by changing passwords or deleting cryptography keys or changing community strings or what be it. And suddenly maybe you have to send a field engineer out to the customer site to replace a router and bring it back home and try and break into it. Worse than that, intruders can and do. They're talking about methods and techniques for altering security policies on the router. They can change ACLs or delete ACLs such that protection that the router may have been offering to the customer or to your network from the perspective of traffic coming back from the customer, things that were not permitted suddenly are permitted. So that type of activity can broaden exposure for further attacks. The other thing to consider is once a CPE device is broken into, it may provide a bridge for additional attacks within the customer's domain of trust. Particularly if a router is being used as the primary security device to keep internet traffic away from the customer's internal network through packet filtering, well, if an intruder can get onto that router, chances are they can get into the inside of the network and start looking around for other things, if that's the only point of defense. Likewise, if as an ISP, if there's managed services going on, there has to be a path from within the ISP's network out to those devices to perform management. And if an intruder can get on the customer router, you have to ask yourself, do they have the same path back inside to the ISP network from that router? If it's simple packet filtering or IP address restriction is the only defense there, chances are the answer to the question is yes, the intruder can get back inside the ISP network to further the attack. The impact of this is, it's certainly possible just to trash the CPE. Let's do a write erase and software image is gone and the box is pretty much brainless. Layer 2 reconfiguration. Intruders can turn off interfaces, causing denial of service type situations. Are the tools in place on your networks to detect that type of activity, or is the detection the customer calling and saying, "Hey, we're out, we're down"? Alteration of layer 3 configuration is where we get into changes in routing protocols and policies. Route injection types attacks, which we'll talk about in a minute. These layer 3 configuration can get into denial of service types attacks, can get into traffic redirection or interception, maybe enabling a sniffer on the router to pick up traffic and look for passwords that are going across the border between the customer network and your network. Prefix hijacking, for example, an intruder may be able to inject the BGP announcement for a particular prefix into the routing table. Is that going to be propagated from the CPE device onto your network, and once it gets onto your network, how far will it propagate from there? Will it go everywhere within your AS, and that's all the further, or will it go everywhere within your AS and then out to peering networks? With the just traffic redirection thing, it's possible for a malicious route injected into the table to cause someone's traffic from anywhere else on the internet, not necessarily a customer of yours, but anywhere else, to be pulled back in to where the malicious announcement was made, or basically changing the endpoints of communication. What can be done about this? I can talk about this. If you have any comments, feel free. Basically, one of the things, these are all things that are well documented, well practiced in host security. With intruders beginning to target the routing infrastructure, it's important to apply those same types of principles to protecting routing gear. In other words, a CPE device should probably be considered as a host, and host security should be implemented to some degree on those devices. Disable unneeded services. If you don't need SNMP, turn it off. If you don't need web interface ports, turn it off. Turn off telnet ports on interfaces where you just simply don't need to have it. If you're going to manage from particular interfaces, only have methods to get into the box on those particular interfaces and nowhere else. Traffic to and from CPE interface addresses probably isn't something that's going to be normal on a day-to-day basis outside of management, getting into the box and doing configuration, or doing SNMP type polling. If it's possible to put tools in place that monitor source and destination addresses that match router interfaces on CPE, that's probably a real good way to pick up malicious activity on those boxes. As Barry mentioned, use strong authentication for management. If you can't go with if you can't go with the Cadillac, at least change non-default passwords. As I mentioned earlier, that's the most common weakness that intruders are exploiting to get into routing equipment. Is there's too many boxes out there that just don't have passwords at all, or the vendor default password is still in play. Some of you may be using out-of-band management paths for primary configuration. I don't know, is anyone doing that? How many people have backup out-of-band management in case? Okay, that's good. Stephen talked a little bit about routing configuration tools in the last session. Consider how configurations get onto the routers, whether or not they're authenticated, how long will it take between point of modification and the point at which you notice that a configuration's been modified. And in your backup configurations, are you going to back up maliciously modified configurations and then think they're authoritative and clean 2 weeks from now? So when pulling configurations off to back them up, maybe verify them against a known good copy to say, yeah, that's really a good config.
Well, I just had
yeah.
So just to clarify, how many people here know when we say the Cisco sniffer? How many people know Cisco sniffer? What we're talking about? All right, Cisco sniffer is, and we only have too few. Put access list, permit, IP, any log. Right? Right? So there's one way. Another way is to debug packet. Right? Yeah, for some people it goes down. This is CPE, right? 1% utilization. You're watching all the packets go through. And then the other thing that we're lucky about with these misconfigurations is a lot of these people going in the community are like Unix guys, and they haven't touched routers and network devices. So they don't think of things like policy-based routing, zero-U tunneling, and all the other tricks we've come up with over these years of gluing networks together, they haven't gotten that far yet, right? So they don't understand, so what can I do with GRE tunnels or policy-based routing if I do policy-based routing this traffic into a GRE tunnel and send it over to my little box over here and capture everything and send it back in. You know, they haven't gone this far yet, right? So all these tricks that we kind of use to glue networks together, they don't know about them yet, but they're gaining access, and it's just a matter of time. And that's what we're worried about. It's a matter of time before they figure it out, these things, right? So I want to clarify what the Cisco sniffer is, because I saw a lot of blank faces. Debug packet, you know. Sorry.
So Melissa's route injection we kind of pulled out as a separate thing because this is something we haven't seen much of. We have seen it, which is scary enough. But as you know, bad routing information does leak out, and I'm not just talking about attacks here. Mistakes, failures, bugs in implementations, and intentionally malicious routing information. This stuff has happened. It's happened for years, mostly from the mistakes, failures, and bugs standpoint. But more recently, we have started hearing about incidents where intruders do go in and maliciously modify routing tables. And when I say recently, I'm talking within the last 3 months. This has started showing up in terms of, hey, I've got access to a box that has BGP speaker on it. What can I do with that? The questions are being asked. The knowledge is going to start being accumulated, and people will have more tools and knowledge in hand to execute these types of attacks as we go forward. This is a growth area. When you want to talk about the...
So our headaches with this has been operational more, right? So 7007 incident, right? What if 7007 is used as an attack, right? So this is the sort of thing we're kind of worried about now because we got all these multi-home CPEs are violated, and you know I don't know, you know how many you've talked to, but sometimes I talk to some of these guys who say, oh, I want to be multi-homed, and they have no clue how to configure BGP, and they kind of hack it together, and it kind of works for them, and they're happy, and they walk away, and they don't ever touch a router again as long as it works, right? And having boxes like that getting broken into, right? And this is where we're really worried about with, especially with CERT starting to see these violated routers broken into. So for those who don't know, this sort of attack, the worry about this is, say down here, autonomous system XYZ, which is down on router N gets broken into, all right? And somebody down there says, let's see, I got what? Let me advertise the entire internet with /24s. So let me come up with a little script, and like in a Unix world, come up with a little script to take our IP version 4 address space and parse it where I can do a Cisco config where I just advertise the entire /24 space. Is a pretty simple programming little exercise to do when I can take that script and log it into a router and then advertise it out. Now, here's a problem. Then Autonomous System 500 and Autonomous System 100, what do? Well, they haven't put their filters in. They don't enforce it, so both of them accept every single one of those routes. More specific, gets split out. And then, of course, nobody really does a lot of egress filtering with their peers, all right? So then AS100 sends to 300, and 500 sends to 300, and it starts to get propagating around the internet with all these routes going out. So you have all these networks starting to go in duress situations as all these more specifics start heading out, which is a situation we have with 7007, right, where you had lots of prefixes spit out and get propagated across the net, and you had duress across the network. It wasn't taking out the internet, but you had ISPs in stress, you had routers crashing that didn't have enough memory, you had traffic going every different direction, you know, you had problems. They put the internet under duress. Not a fun sort of situation you want to have, okay? So, you know, I call this the garbage in, garbage out. You know, when somebody sends out garbage and you allow garbage in, all right, and this is kind of the garbage in, garbage out problem with it, all right? And so we have operational experience with this, with, you know, things that broke. Now, we see this sort of stuff from a monetary point of view because some of the spammers They go out there and hijack a prefix, and they, you know, I don't know the specifics, but some of these guys, what I heard is they take some of these routers that got broken into, and they use it and they advertise the prefix, and they send out their spam, and then they turn it off. And, you know, and that's how they use for their spam bots. They advertise one prefix, send it out, turn it off. Now, they don't want to get caught, right? So they're not going to go out there and, like, send all /24s and put the internet under duress, because their monetary motivation is to send out their spam without getting caught, right? So we are seeing this sort of stuff happening in that sort of case with a monetary motivation. And, you know, whenever anything like this that is malicious, that has monetary motivation, it gets kind of dangerous, because, you know, people are making money by doing this. So the good news is this is mainly a BGP speaking router problem. The bad news is there are a lot of multi-home BGP speakers out there is increasing, and the really bad news is how many of those multi-home BGP speaking routers can you type in Cisco and get into the box, right? Remember, it's not Cisco's fault. Remember, we don't put Cisco as a default password, but how many people who do their configuration scripts and all of a sudden they just type in Cisco, I don't know why that is. They type in Cisco for their passwords, right? You know, so somebody's typing in that as their password. And then you know, it's the problems with what they can do with it. Now, what can you do about it? Well, the impact is denial of service and hijacking and AS hijacking and prefix hijacking, right? That's our impact with it. What can we do about it? Number one thing is put Ingress prefix filters on all your BGP speaking customers. It's not rocket science to do that, all right? So you as an ISP should only accept those prefixes that you've allocated to them, or you've made some arrangement because they are multi-home with another provider, right? So give an example. You take a downstream customer has a /20. You've allocated them a /20 from your block. This is a block that the regional registry has allocated to you. You've allocated to your customer. So you know what they're allocated because they're coming from your block. That's the way we do addressing. The customer should only announce this block to the rest of the world, only this /20. So the rule set for setting up something like this is a very simple rule set. That's a 2-line prefix list. And that 2-line prefix list will only allow, you know, this is a Cisco config, but, you know, other router configurations is very simple. You just permit what he's allowed to send in, you deny everything else. All right? That simple statement, right? I get surprised why so many people don't do this simple sort of thing on their customers, right? So this is kind of the number one sort of thing that ISPs can do to protect against this sort of problem, all right? But then, you know, containment filters, right? So you have to design your network with principles of survivability. Murphy's Law of Networking says that someday with this particular prefix list on your customers, they could break, okay? And we know this because our number one problem with stability on the internet is maintenance injected trouble. Somebody going in there with fumble fingers and doing something and breaking their own network, right? It's actually our biggest problem with stability on the internet is us, you know, breaking our own networks, right? We know this from different sort of statistics and stuff. So it would be very easy to see where somebody's gone in and deleted all the prefix lists on a big aggregation router for all the customers, and they're all gone. And nobody knew about it because nobody checked the config. And so here you have you know, several hundred routers, customers on one router, and there's no prefix on it, and you know it's broken. So now somebody could leak it out and get through. So this is where you look at putting containment filters in there. And this is all dependent on how you've set up your routing inside your network, where you put them on your POP, regional nodes, backbone nodes, but where someplace where everybody can put these things is where you peer with other ISPs. Whether you peer with your upstream provider or you peer with other ISPs with peers, is you can put an egress filter there, okay? Because you should know what you should be sending to the rest of the world, right? I'm sending routes out to the rest of the world. Well, you should know what you're sending out to the rest of the world, right? And a lot of people I talk to don't know what they're sending out to the rest of the world. They just send whatever they want to send, you know, whatever is being sent, and it gets sent out. And this is how something like this, you can lose containment, and a problem that's caused by one of your customers will be propagated out to the rest of the world, right? And again, setting up on this containment filter, it again, is not rocket science, because here you're allocated a block of addresses, right? The way we set things up with RSC 2050 is provider-based addressing, so you know what blocks you have. You know what blocks you're supposed to send out to the world. Now, with some of the big providers, that's a big list. With other providers who started up under the CIDR world, it's a manageable list because the regional registries tried to do a good job of allocating within aggregable blocks, right? But it's something that you know that you're allocated with, and so that gives you a foundation to start building it up with. But then the next excuse people say is, oh, but, I got all my multi-home customers and they're multi-home with, other providers, so, that I can't do it then. Well, actually, no, you still should know what you're going to send out to the world. And if you're setting up an arrangement with another provider or with one of your customers that have some other provider's blocks and forward with those, then you should explicitly know that you're going to do that and keep track of them. You should have that in a list. So you say, okay, we have made arrangements with these customers, and I'm allocating these blocks from this provider and these blocks from this provider. I know what I should be sending out. Again, it's something, you should know what you're sending out to the rest of the world. And if you knew that, then you can create a tool to create a prefix filter for the egress, going out to the egress world. Bigness is not an excuse. I've told several guys this is oh, we're so big. Bigness is not an excuse for what you send out to the rest of your peers, right? So this is kind of like things you can do with prefix filtering. Okay. So registry, messing with the registry.
Is there anyone here from an RIR? Hello.
This is for you.
This has been a stick I've been carrying for a while. Malicious people can change information in the RIR databases. The mechanisms in place to prevent that from happening, I refer to as transaction authentication. Historically, the methods of transaction authentication on the RIR databases has been mail from. If in some cases that's the only thing available, in other cases that's the only thing a large majority of the people really use. So this is a bad thing because how many of you, when a customer calls you up on the phone and says, I want to announce this prefix under my AS, do you do a whois lookup to validate that they really own it? Okay. That's what I thought. So we actually had an incident, it's probably on the next slide, but I'm going to talk about it now anyway, where someone social engineered their ISP into announcing a /16 and someone else's AS through their ISP. They went and did mail from at the regional IR and changed the contact information for a Class B address and an autonomous system number, called their ISP, and got it announced. That's bad. So if you're using whois information to validate ownership, think about how you're doing that again. And that particular attack was actually a couple of years ago. More recently, there was something on the NANOG list a couple of weeks ago. Someone was going through great pains trying to track down why some organization was using one of their prefixes to send information out to the net. While I don't know the details of that incident, I suspect it had a lot to do with a malicious route announcement. This type of use of registry information can certainly be used to execute those types of attacks through social engineering. We published a vulnerability note on this in 1999. And it still hasn't been sufficiently addressed as far as we're concerned. I mentioned the social engineering thing. I won't go through that again. The other things that can happen, well, if you have a comment, please make it. Yeah. Just a reminder that the Aaron meeting is this week. So repeat the question. The comment made was that mail from has been suspended in the RIPE region and APNIC. Thank you. So there's other bad things that can happen with modification of registry information. So those particular, the RIRs in particular, the registry records there control the pointer, or the glue records to the pointer address space, the inatter.arpa space. How many of you have services on your network that do reverse name lookups? You're using that space, okay? So log files. And them to respond to problems and security events, you're relying on that infrastructure. So someone can use mail from, go in and change a delegation record for inatter.arpa space and violate the trust of that information. Same thing goes for people who are building access lists based on domain names rather than IP addresses. I talked about alteration of, I talked about this already. What can you do? Demand and use strong transaction authentication and make your customers aware of, obviously in ISP space cases, you're typically delegated a block of addresses from the RIR, and then you SWIP that out, or what's the new error mechanism isn't called SWIP, it's something else, but basically you give that out to a customer, and then typically they're responsible for doing the updates of the who is information. Educate the customers, maybe put when that address is handed out, put a little, here's how to keep this information safe type statement. Verify critical registry records on a regular basis. If you have registry records that would cause a grave deal of problems if they were modified, do you have any mechanism in place to once in a while go out and verify that they're really what you think they are? And this applies for domain registries as well as RIRs, because we've actually had a few cases of glue record injection attacks in the domain-based registries, where I go out and register a domain or make an alteration to the delegated records in inatter space, and one of the name servers I provide is actually a name of someone else's A record out in their space. So I get a name and an associated IP address put out into the glue of the DNS, and for people who are performing DNS queries that make it up to the roots or the GLTDs or the inatter equivalent, I may get an A record back for www.example.com as glue and never get to the real site. We've seen that type of thing happen. Some registries, I don't know how much this is done anymore, maybe those of you from registries can answer this, but some registries used to allow or be able to put freezes on critical records so that you simply couldn't modify them unless you had contacts and called someone up and said, I need to change this. So if there are infrastructurally critical records, you might explore that type of an option. Any questions or comments on that one? Yeah.
Just one comment to regular checking. An operation of something based on running really sort of regular is not every hour.
Yes. I was thinking like maybe monthly or something.
I'm going to repeat that.
The comment was made that regular checking of critical registry information does not mean every hour. That's from the perspective of folks that run the whois servers. Good comment. There's another question in the back. Yes. Well, that's the question is what happens if the social engineering is happening against the registry, so that as far as the registry is concerned, all information is legitimate looking and the change takes place, meaning It's not, the channel isn't like sending an email and doing mail from, it's sending a legal document saying, I really am this organization, change the information, please. Is that correct? Same approach, I think, is don't trust who is information as a sole source of verification in those types of instances, because that's not information that you have any control over. Someone else is controlling that information. Have alternative means. If it's a you can do a prefix lookup in the routing tables. Have some little script that you can type a command and it comes back and tells you, yes, no, this is being announced, this is not being announced currently on the internet. If it is being announced, then you have to sit back and question, okay, maybe this is a multi-home network and someone's asking me to bring it in from another source. Can I verify that in some way? I don't know what the answer to that question is. I presume that's not as easy as it's
I got some background to that because of helping get registries started out in Asia, which is easier in some of the countries there because of the way they do the registries of business. So like in the Singapore context, any change records going into SG-NIC, they actually check into the registry of business to make sure that's a valid business and they have a valid business license and things like that. But the other thing, when you do that sort of complex social engineering where you forge in business documents and send the things in, keeping all that as evidence, because if you go through and everything looks up and up and you make the change, and somebody else pops up and say, hey, why'd you make this change? You have all this evidence, and then it could become a criminal or a civil court case matter. So as long as you keep the evidence, then it's something that will be taken, it will be a denial of service, but denial of service is then damages, and the party that was damaged can then either do a civil or criminal case if you got those records. Because if you forge those records and there's somebody touching those records, somebody doing the attack.
We're all familiar with transiting DOS attacks from attacking point or points to some victim point on the network. Actually, more and more what we're seeing is the victim point in the network is the network. It's the routing equipment itself. Intruders are figuring out that they can generally have a larger blast radius and cause more pain by DOSing a router upstream from their intended victim than DOSing the victim themselves. One of the reasons for that, one reason for that is topology, obviously. If I can DOS your upstream router, it's going to cause not only you pain, but everybody around you pain, and as far as I'm concerned as a bad guy, that's a good thing. But also, IP stack code path may be more expensive for packets directed at the router than packets going through the router. So these types of attacks tend to be a little bit more painful than transit-based DOS attacks. And I'll let Barry get into the details of this.
All right, so this is, these next series of slides is kind of building up the case of, attacks hitting from an ISP's perspective. I'll flip through all the animation here, but basically, if you hit the router upstream from the target, and whoop, hello. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Faster, back, there. All right. So, if my idea is to hit the target, I'm trying to take out a website. I'm trying to take out a website. Do I need to hit port 80 to take out the website? No, I don't. If people can't reach port 80, if they can't reach the IP address, well, I've succeeded in my objective. I've taken out the website. So, and people are realizing that this is things they can do. They can go after it, right? So, and then we also have these games that are played where malicious people trying to go after each other too, right? So they, I'm a hacker, you're a hacker. Who's a better hacker? Well, I'll take out your home. I'll take out your business. I'll take, you got this cross sort of games that goes on within the community where it's not really trying to go after a website. They're just trying to go after each other and see who's better at it. So traceroute, really good intelligence tool to figure out what are the routers out there. Traceroute to a website, and then you find out the path to it, and you say, okay, these guys look like routers, these guys look like switch, there's a website. And then you know the targets from the upstream to go after. And then some of these to go after, they don't have to be big volume attacks. all right? They can just be high TPS attacks. So they may not pop up on like a huge surge of bandwidth because they're very small packets at a high TPS rate. Okay, so as Kevin mentioned, network device implementations, when you're on the receive path, that means any packet that's destined for the network device themselves. Network devices have been built to forward packets through the device, not to take in huge volumes of TPS rates into the device. So you'll hear people, say how we got really high TPS rates on OC1 and A2s, but they haven't optimized their box to take in high TPS rates at OC1 and A2 into the box itself. They can forward through it, but if you take that to it, they haven't been optimized. So you do your protection stuff, which is a different line of talk. So this is again the packet size sort of attack methods where you're doing a higher PPS rates. The other effect with this is collateral damage. Now, collateral damage, a nice little military term is where, you go after like the CPE device to take out a website, okay? Well, the other thing you can do is go after the upstream router that the CPE is protected to, all right? So I can go after and be very specific and take out the CPE that supports the website, okay? And that's like a cruise missile attack. Or I can do like the old Monty Python skit and use a tank to kill a mosquito and go after the distribution router that supports the customer on the ISP. So I'm hitting the ISP to take out the customer, all right? So, you have your options, and it's a character of the guy who's attacking and this is why the collateral damage. But collateral damage goes beyond more than the attack. And this is the main reason, now I'm going through the slides, the main reason why I say that all ISPs, you have to start doing something about DOS on your customers. Some ISPs say, well, if our customers get DOS, then we don't see a business justification of helping them out. I take the stance that I think all ISPs, you've got to be doing something to help your customers because it impacts your network because of collateral damage. If it hasn't right now, then it will happen because of the way the industry's going, all right? Because the key is once a DOS packet goes into the internet, somebody's got to do one of two things with it. You got to terminate that packet, or you got to drop that packet. They don't disappear, right? It's just, a packet goes in, it doesn't just magically disappear. Somebody's either got to terminate it or somebody's got to drop it, okay? And terminating takes CPU resources, memory resources, ASIC resources, and dropping it takes CPU, ASIC, resources, all right? They don't just disappear. Something happens with them there, all right? So it's a question of who and where the packet's going to get dropped in the DOS attack, all right? So here, you got to especially with the DDoS tools, you got this aggregation effect. When you're out towards the source of the attack, it's very light. But as you get closer and closer into the target, the attack volume starts to amplify. Now, who says the attack source, like a web server, can take that volume of traffic? Okay? Because a lot of times these attackers don't go through and traffic engineer the attacks. They don't go through and say, okay, I got 3 tools here, and they have this much CPU power. I'm connected at a duplex fast Ethernet connection. Hence, each one I'll do my bandwidth calculations, and I'll figure out I'll do 60 megabits per second. And across my ISP, I have 192s here and things like this. So I don't want to hurt the ISP. I just want to take out the T1. 300 megabits per second should take out a T1, right? They don't think this way. They just go, they want to take out the guy and go, get him, right? They don't think about all the damage they're doing in between, right? Let's take out the website, right? So this is why you get these situations where, the attacks are coming in from many directions. They congregate on the point of the target. The point of the target has a POP that's supporting it, right? And that's your POP, that's your infrastructure, that's with a lot of your customers. And then you have this situation where, I'm throwing 300 megabits of traffic at this T1, right? And where's the packets drop? It's not, the T1's not dropping it. The T1's saturated. T1's pushing in congestion collapse. All right. So what happens now is you got your devices and your POP dropping the packets. All right. And if those devices in the POP are dropping the packets, that could have collateral damage with all your other customers. So then it's not only the customer under attack calling you, it's all the other customers calling you up saying, hey, what's going on? How come the network is so slow? Right? You know, your network's really slow today. How come? You know, it's because your neighbor's getting attacked right now. Right? So this is collateral damage. I call this a DOS funnel going in. Now it gets worse because of where here, put my vendor hat on, where you as providers want us as the vendor community to go down through this race of competition to see who can come up with the box that has the highest customer per rack unit density. Right? How many customers in a given rack unit can I fit? And you want it for cable, for DSL, for dial, for lease line, you want it for all of it. This is where you want us as vendor community to go. So we got this big competitive race going on right now of who can get the most customers in a given rack unit. That means we're having these boxes with huge densities of customers. It's not just like an old, 7513 with these cards in it. We're talking about these boxes that with 10,000 plus customers on them, right? And this is a box that all of a sudden is dropping packets on one of those customers is under attack, and you got 999,000, or 9,999 customers who are not being attacked, being affected, right? Now that's a big, when outages like that happen, that's a big outage, right? So this is where it's getting going on. And then you have these other things, DOS flapping, right? If I go through and I hit a T1, that's a BGP speaking T1, and I put it in congestion collapse, what happens? My path for forwarding the packet goes down to that T1 because my BGP says I should go down that T1. Okay? Now I put it in congestion collapse. What happens? BGP times out. BGP goes away. I got a backup path. All right? So now I flip over to the backup path. Where's your DOS go? Let's go down the backup path. What do I do there? Put that in congestion collapse. BGP goes away. Other BGP comes back up. I flap over the other side. All right? So this is what we call DOS flap. So here now, and how do you really have it engineered inside your backbone? Here you have this DOS attack going on. Those big fire holes of DOS packets go hit one pop, right? Also flip over, go to another pop, right? Because if you're going to multi-home the customer, you don't pull them into the same pop. You put them into two different pops, right? So you're going from one pop to the other pop across your backbone. All right, and that's doing damage across with the backbone. And then if you're multi-home to two different providers, all of a sudden you're hitting one ISP, and then BGP goes away, and you flip over to the other ISP, and you're flapping across the internet with an attack. So these are DOS flaps, right? And then the other shade of DOS flaps is, okay, say you hit the, just a non-BGP speaking customer, right? You got a static, and the static is connected to the interface, and you put the link into congestion collapse. And the link goes down because of congestion collapse. And the static route that's attached to that in your IGP or your BGP disappears. And now where does the traffic go? It goes to your aggregate. Where do you put your aggregate? Do you put it on your borders? Do you put it in your POP? Wherever the aggregate is, that's where the attack is going to go. I'm going to hit the aggregate, and then the customer will come back up, and you hit them again, and you go back and forth. And this is flapping. It's hitting your infrastructure, right? So this is why collateral damage is real. It hits ISPs, and it's going to get worse as we get higher and higher customer densities, right? So the key here to prepare for this is to start looking at how you architect your network, right? DOS attacks are never going to go away, right? I mean, here we're trying to do all sorts of things with it, and people don't want to do things like, validate addresses as they come into the network to make sure the source address is a valid source address. They don't want to do BCP 38 for all sorts of different reasons with it. Right? And this is something that all those fancy new, I'm not going to name names, but we got all sorts of them now, VPN tunnel and solutions, right? All our, what is the best way of doing the VPN solution out there with the different technologies. This affects them too. Some people say, oh, if I use this new technology that, this is going to solve everything. I won't have a security problem. Not because, packets got to drop somewhere, right? So this is why you need to go into. So some of the tools that we have out there today that we know that works, classification ACLs, sinkholes, backscatter, are some of the tools out there we know, like sinkholes and backscatter, we know it works. So walking through with this, take like remote trigger black hole. Last summer, I was in a big shock when I found out that so many people didn't know how to do this, and then, the last tutorial last fall in Oakland, you know, Chris and Brian from Unit came out and was so kind to say, look, black hole, remote trigger black hole works. We do it at Unit, all right? We're able to go through and black hole across all 701, 702, 703 with just one injection, and we can push the drops out to the edge of our network really quick. The time limit is the amount of time for us to log in and configure it, all right? So what this is basically you stick a static route out in the edge, and we got white papers on this if you walk through it, but briefly you just stick a static route on the edge of your network, okay? So all devices out there on the edge of your network, you have a static route that equals null zero for an address that you're never going to use. So like Chris and Brian, they have their favorite. My favorite, what I teach, I like testnet. You know, testnet is one of those, you know, special use addresses that nobody's ever supposed to advertise on the internet, and it's a nice little /24 that nobody's going to use, and you stick it out a static route in every single one of your routers, equal null zero. Doesn't hurt anything. Doesn't impact your network at all. So here's a security tool you can put in and will have zero effect on your operations, because all it is stick a static route for a prefix that nobody ever supposed to use, unless they're using a spoofed address for a DDoS attack, well, then you drop it anyways, all right? And then you do your BGP advertisement. We say, here's the guy who's getting attacked, and he's causing huge damage. He can't do anything. It's hitting my POP, and I want to push that drop off of on the edge of my network. I want to distribute the drop. Instead of having all the drop hit my POP, I want to push the drop off to the end of to the edge of my network. So I take the /32 that's under attack, send the BGP advertisement into my network, equals the next top of that testnet. Hits out to the edge of the network, right? And, you know, with all this collateral damage that's happening down here, I push it onto the edge of my network, I send the BGP advertisement out, and then on the edge, you know, boom, trash can. And the reason why you want to do that is this is the entry point. It's not aggregated yet. Remember, as the DOS traffic gets closer to the target, it starts building up momentum. All right? Here I push it all the way out to the edge, boom. And people say, you know, you cannot, with this technique, you cannot say, oh, it won't work in my scenario. I mean, come on. 701, 702, 703, they are bold enough to stand up here on stage this time last year. It's on tape. You can go look at the tape. You can look at the white papers and say, it works for us. If it will work for them, it will work for I can't think of anybody else it wouldn't work for, right? So this is a technique. And it's just a tool. It's not going to work for every single situation, but it's a tool. If you're sitting there going like, man, I need to push this off. It's hurting me too bad. I need to push this off. And it's a tool. You pull up the tool, you know, it's like you don't use a screwdriver to hammer a nail, right? You know, you use the appropriate tool, all right? So this is a tool to your toolbox to add. You know, all it takes is, you know, a couple of scripts or a static route and just a little, pick a router to be the trigger router, all right? So that's the key thing. It's a great option to add in there, all right? Sinkholes. Sinkholes is something else. And different people are doing sinkholes in different ways. Basically, a sinkhole is forwarding traffic off, all right? And several providers are using this to pull traffic off of those big aggregation boxes, all right? So here, I got a little sinkhole. I got a router out there with a part put in my network that's designed to suck in traffic. I'm going to send a BGP advertisement out there. So here's my target. It's getting hit, all right? So, you know, it's a T1 /32 getting hit. You know, nobody can get to them anyways. And now this aggregation box, I have 9,000 customers on this aggregation box. Do I want to go in there and start playing around with configurations when I have 300 megs of traffic trying to go down to T1? Okay, so here you have a box that could be under stress. Do I want to go in there and start playing around with the configuration at this time? Not advisable. No matter how big, how good you make the box, you may say, this box is under stress. Let's move the attack somewhere else that's designed to do this, all right? So all I do is I take that /32 that's getting attacked, and I advertise it into my sinkhole. What happens? Now the attack shifts to the sinkhole. So this is a part of your network that you put all your forensics tools, you analyze, sniffers, you know, access lists, all sorts of tools you want to take a look, what's going on with this attack, right? Now, sure, the rest of the world can't get to that website under attack, that /32, but all the other services are open to the customer, so you just restored partial service to your customer. you just pull the attack off of the aggregation router. You just reduced your risk to all your other customers as you work in this attack, all right? And you just pull it in there, and you pull it into a part of your network that you've designed with all your forensics tools. You know, a sniffer. You know, there's some providers, it's a Unix box, right? Running Zebra and doing TCP dump. All right? That's your sinkhole, right? They just got a Unix box, TCP dump, Zebra. And that's what they use. You know, others is an entire network with sniffers and things behind it, all right? And you have to engineer this in, and you want to do it before something like this happens, all right? So this is Sinkhole and remote trigger black hole are two techniques that you can use to mitigate collateral damage. That you can use to pull the attacks off the big aggregation devices and kind of take a look at it. And they both work. And people are using these techniques out there today. All right. So, yep.
Back up a second. The other thing this does, if you actually want to do traceback, it immediately tells you which routers at your border are bringing the attack packets into your network, so you know where to go look. Whereas without this technique, you've got to kind of trace back from the victim point, look at, you know, what interfaces is traffic coming in. You have to branch back through your network, whereas this immediately tells you where at your borders the packets are coming in.
Yes, when you add these things together, then you come up with the backscatter or traceback technique and some of the other techniques to kind of find out, okay, what are the entry points? Because if you want to go through and stop the attack, here you pull the attack off and you minimize the damage to, you know, the 9,000 other customers, and you've restored partial service for that one customer, and the /32 is restored, but then the attack is still in progress. How do you trace it back to the point of origin? You need to know the entry points, how to take it into the point of origin. So this allows you, it gives you breathing space where you can do that trace back without having all the collateral damage happening on your network. All right. But keep in mind that what happens in reality, this hasn't picked up, but attacks rotate and shift. All right. So when you start doing this, you got to be mindful and keep an eye on things, because what can happen is the attacker is doing trace routes. Because see, a lot of attackers, they monitor the quality of their attacks as they're hidden, right? Because if your job is to take out the website and you launch a DOS attack, then what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that the DOS attack is not accessible. I'm going to do trace routes and stuff, you know? And if the guy's doing trace routes of his attack, and all of a sudden you do a sinkhole the attack off to the, you know, redirect your attack off to the sinkhole, the trace route changes. And the guy goes, oh, okay, let me shift to a different address. Let me shift my target. You know, they rotate the attacks, you know, so you'll see, like, you know, attacks rotate through with different tools. Okay. So you know, so assume, you know, be prepared. I mean, these tools you don't want to do in the last minute. You be prepared with it. So in summary, what's next? We know, you know, the intruders are looking at routers. They're breaking into routers. They're trading routers. Okay, and that's really what's an alarm flag. When we started seeing people trading violated routers in the black market, you know, that's put out the alarm flag of why we're here today, to give you guys as providers to say, okay, it's time to get prepared. You know, you have a vested interest to do something about this, to protect your network's operational stability and protect your business. Because remember, we have had colleagues, businesses go out of business from DOS attacks. Okay, so it's a business factor. So if you go to your bosses and say, we need to put some money into this, we need to get a couple of routers to build a sinkhole, we need to spend some time and have a maintenance window to go through and implement remote trigger black hole filtering. We need to put some time and put some tools into the test backscatter traceback. You know, and they say, well, we don't see the business interest here. You just point to them to the guys who've gone out of business from persistent DOS attacks. All right. What's that? Of guys we had one guy in England, one guy in Hong Kong that went out. I remember I forgot the guy in England. The guy in Hong Kong I gotta look up. All right, so these guys went out. I mean, the guy in England, you know, there was a press article about that about a year ago. Just people just hit him, you know, attack. And then the other step is we got tomorrow night security BOF, because as I go around in my job working at ISP Security, working on communicating the techniques we know that work, and working with colleagues and providers to create new techniques and new technology and new equipment, things like that. The number one complaint I hear is they can't find their peers, their colleagues, and the other ISPs. People can't find each other. So we got two things going on. Number one, we're starting up security BOF, just like the peer and BOF. The peer and BOF is the same problem. Peer and BOF started several years ago with, I can't find my peer and partners. All right, so Bill Norton started the peer and BOF so you can find your peer and partners. So tomorrow night we're doing a security BOF so you can meet other security people, trade cards, get to know each other, because that's key, right? We know from the past that big security incidents on the internet, one of the key things that help mitigate the problems on the internet is us knowing each other, right? Knowing who we are, knowing where we work, knowing what you could do, pick up the phone, call each other, send emails, things like that, all right? So we got that. And then we have another forum, which is working out quite well, which is a private forum. So we check out who you are, which is ISP Security, okay, ISP-Sec. And that is primarily the guys who are working on mitigating attacks, okay, because we're kind of try to keep the lurkers away. You know, if you want to sit on there and watch and learn, you know, we'd rather you wait for like a session like this, because we're going to take materials from there and then bring it to like forums like NANOG and RIPE and Apricot and things like that. This is kind of like the guys working with each other to stop attacks. And it's 3 weeks now, and we're stopping attacks. There's guys finding each other and stopping attacks. Some of it is actually using the list, talking to each other and stopping attacks. Some of it is saying like, hey, call, you know, I'm under attack, give me a contact over here. They get the contact, and they talk to each other offline, and they stop it, you know. So it's actually working out. So those of you who are security people who are not on this list, then just go to the URL that's on here and you can sign on, all right? But we work hard to try to keep the, you know, especially the press off of there, all right? So, and that's, if people are wondering about what happened, why you know, everybody is wondering, how, you know, seeing this Washington Post article on the, you know, big serious attack against the internet, the most serious ever, and you guys are sitting and go like, huh? I didn't see the roots go down. You know, basically what happened is, you know, these things that happen against the roots all the time, you know, a standard normal DOS attack that you see all the time going on, usually, you know, it was on this forum, and we worked it on this forum where people found each other and we were able to plug it up faster. All right? So it worked. We're plugging it up faster. But a couple of those email messages got leaked up, and the press goes, oh, wow, this is juicy. And they got, you know, pat on the back for, you know, breaking the article. And once something like Washington Post writes it, then everybody else has got to report against it. And so that's what happened. So tomorrow night, and then on the email list. And now we're open for questions. Yes?
What if you have a RFC 1918 space for point-to-point interface?
So using RFC 1918 addresses, which is the private address space on that point between yourself and your customers. I think that is one of personal preference. My personal preference on that space is as much as possible to use unnumbered or to use /31s. I've never seen a benefit of using private address space security-wise on my infrastructure. You know, the RFC says you shouldn't, but me personally, as a network engineer, have never seen a security benefit for using it. Some people say, oh, well, I can't ping to it, but see, you can use reflection attacks to get to it, right? There's still ways of going after it. I've never saw where the, you know, the manageability of it and the extra risk you get, because you get this stuff where, you know, if your customer routes leak through and they're using RFC, you know, it wasn't designed for that, and nothing's ever convinced me that I gained a lot by using RFC 1918 as infrastructure addresses or as my addresses between me and my customer. So that's my personal preference. Yeah.
I've heard arguments both ways. So.
Yeah, there's arguments both ways. Nobody's been able to convince me that from a security perspective, it gained me anything. You know, in my experience in building networks, it hasn't seen anything where it gained me anything. And well, you got these nice little reflection attacks that are increasing out there, and routers are great reflectors, right? And you know, we got ISPs that say, how come I got people calling me up and saying I'm attacking them when I'm not attacking them? And the addresses they give me for attacking are routers. You know, what a reflection attack is, there's different types of different reflection techniques depending on the protocol, but, you know, say like a simple TTL expiration. You know, you set your TTL really low where it times out on this particular router, and then you reflect it back. And the reflection back is your target. Well, the source address, make it an RFC 1918 address in your infrastructure, and you take it in and reflects back towards, right? So you reflect it back. And you can get lots of these reflectors out there, right? You know, that you can build to plan an attack to get in there. Because people would say, well, you know, if you do that, say the argument what people say is if you use RFC 1918 as infrastructure addresses, people can't get to it. But there's ways you can get to it, you know. Or like Kevin brought up, if you use RFC 1918 as infrastructure addresses and use those infrastructure addresses going towards your CPE customers on that serial link, well, you break into that CPE and then you're into the security domain in there, right? So, you know, there's arguments both ways, you know, and this is kind of like engineering preference. Yeah, I state that because it's engineering preference, because it's controversial sometimes. Yes?
I want to touch on just the fact that as soon as you assign RFC 1918 addresses on the WAN links, you have the potential of breaking things like source points, path MTU, for people that filter source RFC 1918 ranges. So if you don't want to filter your own replies going back to devices that are going through your network.
Yes, so what you're saying is the operational impact of using RFC 1918 and the infrastructure addresses is things where like NTU discovery and things kind of break. And then we also have what you mentioned is the source, the reply backs, the squelches and stuff. And instead of going to your customer, it can go to your boxes, right? Because, you know, RFC 1918 was designed for your customers, right? That's what we designed it for. And when you move it to some place where it wasn't designed for, then we have these unintended consequences. And to me, all the unintended consequences build up where it keeps on telling me, well, I should not use it there.
For networks not connected to the global internet.
Yeah, it is. As he quotes the RFC, I guess you've been doing this quite quite a lot. So that is a matter of unintended consequences. You know, it was designed for one thing, and when you put it outside of its envelope for what it was designed for, things happen that are unexpected. More questions? Okay, well,